Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name's Ethan Hutchinson, and just 3 months back, I was a 34-year-old security guard scraping by on $18 an hour at an office tower in downtown Los Angeles. My ex-wife, Lauren, had taken just about everything worth holding on to. The Malibu house her father gifted us after the wedding, the custody papers giving her full say over our twin boys, Liam and Noah, and the last bits of pride I was still clinging to. The night that turned my life upside down started like any other. Quiet lobby, stale coffee, and the endless hum of fluorescent lights, until an old man suddenly collapsed in front of my desk, clutching my sleeve with surprising strength. His eyes were wild, and the words he gasped out changed everything I thought I knew about my life. But before I tell you what he said, you need to see it the way I saw it that October night. Aurora Tower, 40 stories of mirrored glass and cold steel rising above South Hope Street, looked impressive from the outside, but inside it was nothing but echoing halls, flickering lights, and the smell of lemon cleaner that never quite covered up the mustiness. I sat at the curved security desk with 16 monitor screens showing a mix of empty corridors and lonely parking levels. Every flicker on the screen felt like a ghost moving in the dark. The hum from the lights above had this way of crawling under your skin after 8 hours straight. My uniform, made of cheap polyester, pinched tight at my shoulders and hung loose around my gut. The little metal badge on my chest, B. Hutchinson, Security, was scratched and worn where Liam's tiny fingers had traced the letters during one of our rare dinners together at Richard's. Those 4-hour visits every Tuesday and Thursday were my only lifeline. Lauren always had her driver drop the boys off late, 15 minutes if I was lucky, half an hour when she wanted to twist the knife. She'd flash that small smirk through the tinted car window, the one that said she knew she'd already won. But the moment Liam and Noah spotted me, all of that melted away. They'd sprint across the parking lot shouting, "Dad!" with their backpacks bouncing and their ties crooked from a long school day. I lived for that sound. I'd already have their happy meals ready, 2 extra fries because I knew they'd share them anyway. We'd sit by the window, the 3 of us, talking about everything that mattered to them, baseball cards, video games, and how Noah's teacher thought he talked too much. Sometimes when they weren't looking, I'd just watch them and wonder how long it would be before they started seeing me the way Lauren wanted them to, a man who'd failed. The drive back to my apartment after those nights always felt longer than it should. I'd catch glimpses of the ocean lights near Malibu and think about the house that wasn't mine anymore, about how the life I built was now just a set of memories with someone else's name on the mailbox. By the time I reached my small studio off Olympic Boulevard, the silence would be deafening. The air smelled faintly of dust and microwave dinners. My phone sat quiet on the counter. No messages, no calls, just the soft glow of the screen reflecting my face. That night at work, though, something in the air felt different before the old man even appeared. Maybe it was the way the wind outside howled against the glass, or how the lights seemed to flicker just a little longer than usual. The lobby was so still I could hear the ticking from the wall clock echo across the marble floor. Then the elevator chimed. When the doors opened, an elderly man in a beige coat stepped out, moving slowly but with purpose. He looked like someone who didn't belong in a place like that at midnight. His face was pale, almost gray, and he seemed to be fighting for every breath. Before I could even ask if he was lost, his knees buckled. I rushed around the desk and caught him just before he hit the floor. His hand shot out, gripping my uniform so tightly that I could feel his nails dig through the fabric. His eyes locked on mine, sharp and desperate. "It's in the vault," he rasped, his voice trembling like a dying engine. "They can't." He choked, coughed, and squeezed harder. "You have to find it before they do." I froze. "Sir, who? What vault?" But his eyes rolled back, and the weight of his body sagged in my arms. The security cameras blinked, the fluorescent hum grew louder, and for a moment it felt like the entire building was holding its breath. I had no idea then, as I cradled that man on the cold marble floor, that this was the start of something much bigger, something that would drag me through secrets buried deep beneath the city and force me to become someone I never thought I could be. For those 4 hours with my boys, I could almost convince myself that life was still normal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Just 6 months before, I'd been living a completely different life. A 7-bedroom house overlooking the Pacific, a Mercedes in the driveway that Lauren's father had leased for us, and a solid job as an accounts manager in Century City. I wasn't rich by Los Angeles standards, but I was comfortable, respected, proud. Then came the afternoon that ripped everything apart. The day I walked into our home gym and found Lauren with her personal trainer, right there on the mat beside the treadmill I'd built for her birthday. After that, my world collapsed faster than I could process. The divorce was a war I never had the means to win. Her father, Richard Prescott, wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful. The man practically owned half of Orange County's commercial real estate, and he had lawyers stacked like dominoes, each one ready to crush anyone who got in his daughter's way. They twisted every text, every phone call, every word I'd ever said. When I'd asked where Lauren was late at night, they painted it as controlling behavior. When I argued about her spending habits, they called it financial abuse. And the judge? He wasn't just biased. He was a golf buddy of Richard E.'s. Every time that man raised his gavel, it was like hearing another nail in the coffin of my life as a husband and father. I still remember Lauren's voice echoing through the courthouse hallway after the final hearing. "You'll die alone and broke, just like your pathetic father did," she'd said, loud enough for every stranger to hear. "The boys will forget you ever existed. Give them 6 months and they won't even remember your name." Those words hit me harder than anything before. My father had died 12 years earlier, a car accident on the 405 as he was driving home from his small mechanic shop in Inglewood. My mother had passed when I was just 12, cancer taking her before she could ever see me grow into the man I'd tried so hard to become. They were honest, humble people who worked until their hands gave out, and Lauren wasn't wrong about one thing. They'd both died with nothing to their names but debt, tools, and a few fading photos. Maybe that's what scared me most, that she'd be right again. So there I sat that October night, October 15th to be exact, staring at the glowing numbers on the digital clock. 2:47 a.m. I was halfway through calculating how many double shifts I'd need to cover November's rent when the lobby doors suddenly slammed open. It wasn't the soft push of a late-night worker or someone drunk looking for a bathroom. It was violent, desperate, like someone had thrown their whole weight against the glass. My chair scraped the floor as I stood up. An elderly man stumbled in, and even from 30 feet away, I could tell something was terribly wrong. His suit, though wrinkled and dusty, was clearly expensive. Italian wool, no question. From my years of schmoozing with clients back in Century City, I'd learned to spot quality fabric and fine tailoring. That outfit alone had to cost at least $5,000. His silver hair was neatly combed, oddly perfect for someone in distress, and the sound of his handmade leather soles echoed sharply across the marble floor with every staggering step. "Help!" he managed to wheeze, and the word cut through the silence like a gunshot. I jumped from behind the desk so fast that I knocked over my half-empty coffee, the brown liquid bleeding across the incident report I'd been writing. By the time I reached him, his knees had buckled. I caught him just before he hit the ground, his body shockingly light, fragile under the weight of that luxury suit. His face was gray, the same eerie shade I'd seen once before when my father's best friend collapsed at a barbecue. But his eyes burned bright blue, sharp and alive, as if holding back something urgent, something meant only for me. After the divorce, Aurora Tower became my entire world. I lived 8 hours at a time, 5 nights a week, in that glass box of silence. The building was home to law firms, accounting offices, and tech startups, the kind of places I might have worked at if Richard Prescott hadn't poisoned every reference tied to my name. My apartment, just a 20-minute drive away in Koreatown, was barely 400 square feet. Third floor of a building that always smelled like kimchi and cigarette smoke. It wasn't much, but it was mine, or at least it would be after another 63 rent payments. The place had a Murphy bed that squeaked every time I pulled it down, an air conditioner that only worked when it felt like it, and a pair of neighbors who argued in Korean every afternoon right when I was trying to sleep. I filled it with whatever I could afford. Craigslist furniture, a wobbly coffee table fixed with napkins from McRichard E's, a 10-year-old TV that only picked up local channels, and a microwave that took 4 minutes to heat a cup of coffee. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, but it was all I had left. The only new thing I owned in that apartment was a cheap wooden frame holding a photo of Liam and Noah from last Christmas. Back when the lights on the Malibu tree still meant something, back when they'd call me Dad, without Lauren swooping in to correct them with that distant, "your father." Every time I looked at that picture, I felt both warmth and ache. It was proof that the life I'd lost had once been real. The security job didn't pay much. $18 an hour, 27 for overtime. But I grabbed every extra shift I could. After taxes and the child support payments that somehow still applied even though Lauren was living off her father's fortune, I cleared around $2,200 a month. Rent took $1,400 right off the top. Gas and insurance for my 2008 Honda Civic ate another $300. What was left went to food, mostly ramen noodles and dollar store groceries. I'd become an expert in survival cooking. 17 ways to make instant noodles feel like an actual meal. I knew which grocery stores marked down their meat at exactly 7 p.m., and I'd stand there like a hawk waiting for the red stickers to appear. Pride became something I learned to swallow like cold coffee. It had a taste worse than off-brand peanut butter. Before everything went south, I worked at Brennan Financial Services in Century City. Accounts manager sounded important enough to impress strangers at barbecues, but really it meant I handled spreadsheets for guys who handled spreadsheets for the ones who actually made the calls. Still, it paid $75,000 a year, came with health insurance, a 401k, and business cards with my name embossed in raised lettering. I wore discount suits from Nordstrom Rack and felt like I was someone who mattered, someone moving forward. Then the divorce hit, and Richard Prescott made sure my forward motion turned into free fall. 3 phone calls from his lawyers, and suddenly I was labeled a potential liability. A week later, I was called into a quiet meeting and handed a severance envelope. Downsizing, they said. Funny how downsizing looked a lot like hiring a 28-year-old named Greg before I'd even packed my box. Every job interview after that felt like déjà vu. Smiles and firm handshakes, genuine interest until they ran my background check. Then the tone changed. We've decided to go in another direction. I knew what that meant. Richard's influence reached further than I could afford to imagine. The security job was the only place that didn't care about any of that. Metro security services needed warm bodies to fill chairs, eyes to watch monitors, and hands to check badges. They didn't care that I'd been blacklisted from corporate life or that my LinkedIn looked like a graveyard. They only cared that I showed up on time, stayed awake, and didn't steal anything. A low bar, but one I could clear without tripping. My supervisor, Carlos Ramirez, was an old-school guy, bald, round-shouldered, with a permanent coffee stain on his shirt pocket, and a sense of humor that came out in quiet bursts. "You're not the first guy with a degree I've seen behind that desk," he told me my first week. "You won't be the last. This city eats people alive. Do your job, don't make noise, and maybe something better comes along." I nodded like I believed him, but deep down, I knew better. Nothing better was coming. I'd sent over 200 resumes in 6 months, applied to everything from bank teller to warehouse supervisor, even tried sales once more, but the doors stayed locked. Either Richard's shadow followed me everywhere, or rebuilding at 34 with a ruined reputation really was impossible. The worst part wasn't the money, it was the time I'd lost with my boys. 8 hours a week, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, 4 to 8 p.m., always at that same McRichard as on Wilshire. It had a play place, cheap food, and, most importantly, a neutral location that Lauren's lawyers couldn't twist into a violation. The lease on my apartment forbade overnight guests, not that I could risk it anyway. All it would take was one report, one anonymous complaint, and I'd lose the last connection I had to my sons. "Why can't we see your new house, Dad?" Noah would ask, his big brown eyes full of innocence and questions that tore holes in me. "It's being fixed up," I'd lie. "The painters are there right now. You wouldn't like the smell." Liam would chime in, honest but sharp. "Mom says you live in a bad place. She says that's why we can't come." He didn't mean to hurt me, he was just repeating what he'd been told, but the words sank deep. Lauren wasn't entirely wrong. Koreatown wasn't Malibu, but it wasn't the neighborhood keeping them away. It was the court order, written by her legal team and stamped by Judge Whitaker, Richard's golfing partner. It said I couldn't have overnight visits until I could provide suitable accommodations, suitable meaning a home like the one they'd taken from me, a life I could never afford again on $18 an hour. That was my world 3 months ago, a ghost haunting a security desk, a father reduced to 8 hours a week, a man slowly fading into the version of failure his ex-wife had predicted. I was alone except for those McRichards dinners, broke except for the $17 in my wallet until payday, and I had no clue that everything was about to change. And according to everyone who mattered, Lauren, C., her father, the judge, even my former coworkers, this was exactly what I had coming. The loser ending up in a polyester uniform, guarding a building he'd once walked into wearing a suit. October 15th, 2:47 a.m. Yeah, I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at the same paragraph in a paperback thriller for 20 minutes, pretending to read. My brain wasn't absorbing a single word. The coffee in my thermos had gone cold hours ago, the kind of lukewarm sludge that tastes like burnt plastic. Outside, Los Angeles was in that strange in-between state, the city's pulse slowing just enough to make you believe it might finally sleep. The traffic hum softened, the sirens faded into the distance, and for a few moments, it felt like I was the only person awake in a city of 10 million. Then the silence broke like glass. The lobby doors didn't just open, they exploded inward, hitting the rubber stoppers so hard they bounced back. The sound was so loud it echoed off the marble like a gunshot. I jumped to my feet before I even knew why. An elderly man stumbled through the doorway, moving like his body wasn't listening to his brain. One hand clutched his chest, the other reached out, swiping at the air as if he could grab hold of something invisible to stay upright. "Help!" he gasped, his voice cracked and desperate, the single word slicing through the quiet lobby. "Please!" I knocked over my coffee as I ran, the brown liquid spreading like an oil slick across the incident report I'd been filling out about a false fire alarm. By the time I reached him, his knees had buckled and his weight started to collapse. I caught him under the arms and lowered him to the floor, his suit brushing against my sleeve. It was immaculate. Charcoal gray wool, tailored perfectly, even now, probably worth more than 2 months of my paychecks combined. The man was tall, maybe 6 feet if he'd been standing straight, but he felt impossibly light in my arms. His face had turned a pale gray that I recognized instantly from my childhood. The same color my father's friend Kenny had gone before they pulled him off the grill during a heart attack one 4th of July. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. "I've got you," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm even as panic crept into my throat. "Just hold on, sir. Help's on the way." His breathing came in ragged bursts, but his eyes, those eyes, were piercing blue, so vivid it felt like they didn't belong to someone dying. He stared up at me with a strange intensity, like he was trying to see something in my face, searching for meaning in a place where none should have been. "What's your name, sir?" I asked, trying to keep him awake as the line clicked and the operator picked up. "Can you tell me your name?" His hand shot out, clutching my sleeve with surprising strength. "Henry," he gasped. "Henry Ashford." "Okay, Henry. I'm Ethan. You're going to be okay. Help's coming right now." I relayed the address to the operator, described his symptoms as best I could. His pulse raced under my fingers when I checked his wrist, erratic and shallow. But even as I spoke, his gaze never wavered. There was fear in his eyes, yes, but something else too. Recognition. Like he knew me. Like he was seeing a ghost. "My God," he whispered, his voice suddenly clear, cutting through the labored breathing. "You look exactly like her." "Like who?" I asked, but he was struggling again, words slipping between gasps. His grip tightened on my arm. "What's your name, son? Your full name?" "Ethan Hutchinson," I said, confusion knotting in my chest. Why did that matter? "Your mother?" he pressed, his breath shuddering. "What was her maiden name?" The question blindsided me. "Mills," I said automatically. "Grace Mills. But she went by Grace Tom S. after she married my dad. Why? Why are you asking that?" His expression shifted. His blue eyes filled with tears that rolled down his temples, glinting in the fluorescent light. His lips trembled as he tried to speak, each word dragging itself out with effort. "Grace Mills," he said slowly, like the name itself hurt to say. "She was my daughter." My entire body froze. "What?" I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not possible. My mother's parents died before I was born. She told me they were killed in a car accident." "No," he rasped, his voice weak but urgent. "No, Ethan. I'm alive. I'm here. I've been searching for her family for 22 years. I wanted to ask 100 questions, to tell him that he was wrong, that this couldn't be real, but the words got stuck in my throat. His chest heaved, his hand still gripping my sleeve. "Ethan," he tried again, but the sentence trailed off into a choked breath. The lobby doors burst open again, this time with the rush of paramedics charging in. The sound of their gear hitting the marble snapped me back to reality. 2 of them knelt beside us in perfect rhythm, one calling out vitals, the other inserting an IV. "We've got him," one of them said as they lifted Henry onto the gurney. I stepped back, my heart pounding, my uniform damp with sweat. As they wheeled him out, his hand reached toward me, fingers twitching like he was trying to finish the sentence he'd started. But the doors shut behind them before he could. "Wait!" I shouted as they started wheeling him toward the door, my voice echoing off the marble. "What were you trying to say, Henry?" But he didn't respond. His head rolled to the side, his mouth slightly open, the color draining from his face as the gurney disappeared past the revolving doors. The female paramedic glanced back at me, her eyes sharp but sympathetic. "You know him?" she asked. "No," I said automatically, my voice shaking. He just came in like this. Where are you taking him?" "Cedars-Sinai," she replied. "Are you family?" The question hung in the air longer than it should have. "No," I said again, though the word felt wrong, like something inside me refused to accept it. "I'm just the security guard." She nodded once, then followed the gurney through the doors. And just like that, they were gone, leaving me standing alone in the cold, fluorescent light. Henry's words ringing in my head, Grace Mills was my daughter. The smell of coffee and sweat filled the lobby. My spilled thermos had created a brown puddle on the marble floor, slowly seeping toward the elevators. My hands were trembling, and when I looked down, I saw streaks of blood on my fingers, thin scratches from where Henry's nails had broken through my uniform shirt. I didn't even feel them happen. I stumbled back to the desk in a daze and called Carlos to report the incident, my voice flat, mechanical, like someone reading from a script. After hanging up, I just sat there, staring at the monitors but seeing nothing. The cameras showed empty hallways, flickering lights, the same lifeless images as always. But all I could hear were Henry's words, looping in my head like static. My mother had told me her parents died before I was born, killed by a drunk driver on New Year's Eve, both gone instantly. She'd cried when she told me, and I'd never doubted her. Why would I? Who lies about something like that? But Henry Ashford had known her maiden name. He'd said she was his daughter, and he'd looked at me like he'd just seen a ghost. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something else. The same piercing blue eyes, identical to hers. It wasn't just coincidence. It couldn't be. At 4 a.m., I called Cedars-Sinai, pacing the lobby floor. The nurse on the other end politely told me they couldn't release information to non-family members. I tried again at 5. Same answer. Again at 6. Still nothing. By the time my shift ended at 7, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was confused, delirious from lack of oxygen. Elderly people said strange things in moments like that. Maybe it was just one of those coincidences that life throws at you to mess with your head. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the memory of the way he'd looked at me, like he knew me, like he was recognizing something buried in my face that even I didn't see. 3 days passed. I went through my shifts like a ghost haunting the same spot. Every time the lobby doors opened, I found myself turning, half expecting Henry to walk in and finish what he'd started to say. I even Googled him on my phone during breaks. Henry Ashford, founder and CEO of Ashford Industries, a massive pharmaceutical company based in Los Angeles. Net worth, $2.8 billion. Married once. Widowed. No children listed anywhere. I scrolled through photo after photo of him shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons, smiling next to celebrities. There was no mention of a daughter named Grace, no obituary, no trace of anyone named Mills. Nothing but polished corporate perfection. But that didn't make sense, because I knew what I'd heard. Grace Mills was my daughter. By Thursday, I'd barely slept in 72 hours. I was sitting on the edge of my Murphy bed, trying to close my eyes for a few hours before work, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. 310 area code, Beverly Hills or West L.A. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another debt collector chasing the last of my ruined credit. But something in my gut made me swipe to answer. Hello? Mr. Ethan Hutchinson? The voice on the other end was precise and professional, with the kind of calm authority that comes from people who bill by the minute. Yes, this is Ethan. My name is Charles Duvall, senior partner at Duvall, Ashford and Associates. I represent Mr. Henry Ashford. He's asked me to contact you urgently. My pulse quickened. Is he okay? Is Henry all right? He's stable, Charles said, his tone steady but deliberate. However, time is critical. Mr. Ashford would like to meet with you as soon as possible. Could you come to my office this afternoon? 2 p.m., if you're available. Where? I asked, already reaching for a pen. 2575 Wilshire Boulevard, Suite 1200. I hesitated. I have work at 4, I said automatically, though the words sounded ridiculous the moment they left my mouth. A billionaire's lawyer was calling me, and I was worried about clocking in on time. Mr. Hutchinson, Charles said, his voice soft but firm. I assure you, this meeting is far more important than your shift. Mr. Ashford has instructed me to compensate you for any lost wages. Please, he's quite insistent. Okay, I said finally, my throat dry. I'll be there. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long minute. My reflection ghosted in the black screen. Then I called Carlos, told him there was a family emergency. It wasn't exactly a lie, though I didn't know what the truth was anymore. I pulled on my best clothes, khakis that weren't too wrinkled, and a polo I'd worn to Liam's school play, and got into my Civic. The engine groaned in protest, the muffler rattling like loose change, but it started. As I drove down Wilshire, I passed the McRichard House where I'd meet my boys in a few hours. If I could make this meeting quick. The law firm's building came into view, 12 stories of mirrored glass and quiet money. I parked across the street, staring at the entrance for a long moment before stepping out. Whatever waited for me inside that tower was about to change everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself. The elevator was nicer than my apartment. The receptionist sat behind a desk that probably cost more than my car. She smiled at me like I belonged there, even though we both knew I didn't. Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Duvall is expecting you. Charles Duvall was in his 60s with silver hair and a suit that made Henry's look casual. His office was all dark wood and leather with a view of the Hollywood Hills that made you understand why lawyers could charge $1,000 an hour. He stood when I entered, shaking my hand with both of his, a gesture that seemed genuinely warm. Mr. Hutchinson, please sit. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? Just answers, I said, surprising myself with my directness. Is Henry Ashford really my grandfather? Charles sat back in his chair and opened a leather folder on his desk. Yes, Mr. Hutchinson, he is. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. My mother told me her parents were dead, died in a car accident before I was born. Your mother told you what she needed to protect you, Charles said, sliding a photograph across the desk. It was old, maybe from the early 1980s, showing a young woman in a graduation gown standing next to a stern-looking man in a business suit. The woman was my mother, maybe 21 or 22, her smile bright but her eyes sad. The man was Henry Ashford, 40 years younger, but unmistakably him. This was taken at Grace's graduation from USC, Charles explained. She graduated summa laude with a degree in education. Henry had wanted her to join the family business, but she wanted to teach. It was the beginning of many disagreements. He slid another photo across. This one showed my mother with a young man in jeans and a work shirt, both of them laughing at something off camera. The man was my father, probably 25, his hands still showing the grease stains that never quite washed off from his work at the garage. 6 months after graduation, Grace met Tom Hutchinson. He was fixing Henry's car at a garage in Brentwood. They fell in love. Henry was building Ashford Industries into an empire and couldn't accept his daughter marrying a mechanic. He told Grace she had to choose the family fortune or Tom. She chose my father, I said, understanding flooding through me. She chose love, Charles corrected. Henry cut her off completely. No money, no contact, nothing. Grace was strong-willed, just like her father. She legally changed her name to Grace Tom S. when she married your father, making herself harder to track. She and Tom moved to the valley, and she told everyone her parents had died. It was easier than explaining the truth. He pulled out more documents. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, private investigator reports dated from 5 years ago. Henry's pride kept him away for years. When his wife, Margaret, died 10 years ago, he realized what he'd lost. He hired investigators to find Grace, but by then she'd been gone for 12 years. Cancer, I said quietly. The report said she died when I was 12. That part's true. Yes, Charles nodded. Henry didn't know about you until 5 years ago. The investigators finally tracked down your birth certificate through hospital records. Ethan Mills Hutchinson, born at Northridge Hospital, May 15, 1991. Mother, Grace Tom S., formerly Grace Mills. Father, Tom Hutchinson. Charles leaned forward, his expression serious. Mr. Hutchinson, Henry has been watching you for 5 years, building up the courage to approach you. He owns the Aurora Tower. He bought it 3 years ago when he learned you worked there. I blinked. He bought a 40-story building because I worked there? He's worth $2.8 billion, Mr. Hutchinson. He would have bought the whole block if necessary. You're his only living family. I thought about the nights I'd sat in that lobby feeling worthless while my grandfather owned the entire building. The irony was so sharp, it almost made me laugh. So why now? I asked, my voice rough. If he knew about me for 5 years, why wait? Why let me lose everything? Work nights, barely see my kids? Charles didn't flinch. He folded his hands on the desk. Because Henry is a man who has spent his entire life controlling outcomes. He wanted to approach you properly, with proof, with an explanation, with something to offer. He was waiting for the right moment. His health created that moment. How bad is it? I asked. He suffered a cardiac episode, Charles said carefully. He's stable for now, but he's 84. He's not naive about time. He wants to put certain matters in order. You are one of those matters. Matters, I repeated. That's a nice way of saying loose ends. Not at all, Charles said. He sees you as family, the only family, and there are assets, shall we say, that he wants protected. He mentioned a vault to you, didn't he? My head snapped up. Yeah, I said slowly. When he collapsed, he said something about the vault, and they can't. I thought maybe I misheard. You didn't, Charles said. He opened another folder, this one thinner. Mr. Ashford has substantial holdings, but not all of them are publicly registered. Some are sensitive. He believes certain individuals inside his company are trying to divert or bury parts of his estate. He intended to tell you personally, but the emergency interrupted him. So this isn't just some Hallmark family reunion? I asked. No, Charles said, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "But it is very much about family. He wants you to have what your mother was denied. He wants to correct what he sees as the greatest mistake of his life." I stared out the window at the hazy outline of the hills. A week ago, I was counting change to buy gas, and now I was sitting in a skyscraper learning that the guy who owned half of Los Angeles real estate circles was my grandfather. "What exactly does he want from me?" I asked. "To meet him," Charles said simply. "To hear him out. To sign a few confidentiality documents before we disclose certain locations and assets, and, if you're willing, to step in where your mother never could." "I'm not a businessman," I said. I was making $18 an hour guarding his lobby. "And he knew that," Charles said. "He watched anyway. He saw how you treated tenants, how you handled emergencies, how you kept showing up even when life was beating you down. He saw your sons, too." My eyes narrowed. "He saw my boys?" "From a distance," Charles assured me. "Discreetly. He asked investigators to confirm their existence. He was moved. He said they looked like Grace." My throat tightened. The idea of this old billionaire watching from the shadows while I ate cheeseburgers with my sons at McRichard's made my chest hurt in a way I couldn't name. "So, what happens now?" I asked. "Now," Charles said, closing the folder, "you go see your grandfather, today. Cedars-Sinai. He's awake and waiting for you. And Mr. Hutchinson?" "Yeah?" "Try not to see this as charity," he said kindly. "This isn't a handout. This is an old man finally doing right by his blood." "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Why did he finally come to me?" Charles folded his hands, his tone softening. "He didn't plan to that night," he said. "For the past few months, he's been visiting Aurora Tower now and then, walking through the lobby, trying to find the right words. He'd sit for a while, watch the security desk from a distance, and then leave before saying anything. But when the heart attack hit, all he could think about was that he might die without you knowing the truth. His heart is failing, Mr. Hutchinson. The doctors are giving him 6 months at best. He wants to make things right while he still can." The words landed heavy. I didn't know whether to feel angry or sad. The man who could have changed my whole life had been a few feet away all along, and it took him almost dying to finally speak to me. Charles drove me to Cedars-Sinai himself in his silver Mercedes. The car was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. We didn't talk much on the way. There wasn't much to say. The hospital loomed ahead, all white glass and metal, shining in the afternoon sun. Inside, everything smelled like antiseptic and money. The cardiac unit was on the 7th floor, polished floors, hushed voices, machines humming softly like distant whispers. Private room 712 overlooked the city. The skyline glittered through the large window, and I remember thinking that one night here probably cost more than my monthly rent. Henry was lying propped up in bed when we entered. He looked smaller than the man I'd held in my arms days earlier. His skin pale, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were alive, bright, and fixed on me the moment I stepped through the door. For a second, I thought he might not recognize me, but then his expression softened. "You have her eyes," he whispered, voice trembling. "Grace's eyes, the same shape, the same way they narrow when you're thinking." My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say to this stranger who claimed to be my grandfather, this billionaire who had bought a 40-story building just to be near me. I sat down in the chair next to his bed, my hands clasped together, waiting for him to speak again. The silence stretched out until he reached for a leather-bound photo album on his bedside table, his fingers shaking slightly. "I brought this from home," he said, opening it carefully. Inside were dozens of photographs. My mother at 5, riding a bike in a rose garden. At 16, standing proudly with a blue ribbon at a science fair. At 18, giving a valedictorian speech in a white cap and gown. Each photo stole my breath. The girl in those pictures had the same smile, the same spark I remembered, but surrounded by a world I'd never seen. Lavish homes, European vacations, glimpses of a life filled with privilege and opportunity. "She gave all this up for my father?" I murmured, tracing my finger over a picture of her standing before the Eiffel Tower. "She gave it up for love," Henry said, his voice steadier now. "And I was too proud, too blind to see that Tom made her happier than I ever could with money. By the time I realized that, she was gone, and I didn't even know where she was buried." "Woodland Hills Cemetery," I said softly. "Section 4, Row E. I go there every year on her birthday." His eyes filled again, and he reached for a pen, writing it down like it was sacred. When he looked back at me, there was something in his expression I'd never seen in my life, a mixture of regret and relief. "Ethan," he said, his voice trembling but clear, "I need you to believe me. I own Ashford Industries. It's worth $2.8 billion. I have homes in Bel Air, Aspen, and Martha's Vineyard. I own a jet, a yacht, an art collection worth more than some museums." He paused, his hand gripping mine. "And all of it, means nothing compared to the family I threw away." I didn't know what to say. He reached for an envelope on the bedside table, his lawyer's letterhead visible at the top. "This is my will," he said quietly. "Updated 3 days ago. Everything goes to you, the company, the properties, the foundation, every share, every asset. You are my only heir, Ethan, my only family." For a moment, the world just stopped. I stared at the paper, at the gold-embossed logo, at the rows of signatures and seals. My brain couldn't process the numbers. They were too large, too abstract. 2.8 billion? It might as well have said infinity. "This can't be real," I muttered. "Things like this don't happen to people like me. I'm a security guard making $18 an hour." Henry's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I was a mechanic's son once, too," he said softly. "Don't ever let the zeros fool you. I built everything from nothing, just like your father did, just like you can. You have our blood, Ethan. The world tried to bury it under bad luck and small paychecks, but it's still there." I felt my eyes sting, and I looked away toward the window. Outside, the sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the city in gold and pink. It felt unreal, like I was standing at the edge of two worlds, the one I'd barely survived in, and another I wasn't sure I deserved to enter. "Why me?" I whispered finally. "Because you're her son," he said simply. "Because I failed her, and I will not fail you." I sat there, the hum of the machine steady and soft, realizing that for the first time in years, someone had said those words to me, and meant them. "People like you," Henry said, his voice suddenly gaining strength. "You're my grandson. Grace is son. You were always meant for more than that security desk, Ethan. Your mother would have wanted you to have everything she walked away from." His words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed. "But I don't know anything about running a pharmaceutical company," I said. "I was an accounts manager, and not even a good one, according to my ex-wife." Henry's expression darkened. "Your ex-wife?" "Lauren Prescott," I said, almost embarrassed to say the name out loud. "Daughter of Richard Prescott." His jaw clenched tight enough that I heard his teeth grind. "You know about her?" I asked cautiously. "I know everything about you, Ethan," he said. "I know Richard Prescott destroyed your career after the divorce. I know he bribed Judge Whitaker to rule against you. I know he made sure no company in Los Angeles would touch your resume, and I know he's been trying to buy my company for the past decade." Henry leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with the fire of a man who'd built an empire out of willpower alone. I've enjoyed telling him no every single time. He pressed a button on the side of his hospital bed, and moments later, Charles appeared in the doorway, moving with the smooth confidence of someone used to being summoned by powerful men. "Charles," Henry said, "tell Ethan about the files." Charles smiled, a polite but predatory smile, the kind that made juries nervous. "Of course," he said, setting a leather briefcase on the side table. "Mr. Hutchinson, we have documented evidence of Richard Prescott's misconduct during your divorce. Bribery, witness tampering, judicial manipulation, the works. We've compiled emails, recorded phone calls, and verified bank transfers. It's enough to destroy him publicly and legally. With this evidence, we can get your divorce settlement overturned." I stared at both of them, the weight of what they were saying barely sinking in. "Why would you do all of this?" I asked finally, my voice almost breaking. Henry didn't hesitate. "Because you're my family," he said simply. "Because I failed your mother, and I won't fail you. Because those boys, Liam and Noah, deserve to know their great-grandfather before I die, and because Richard Prescott needs to learn that nobody hurts my family." His words burned with a cold kind of power that filled the room. He reached out and took my hand in both of his grip still firm despite the tubes and the failing heart that kept him tethered to the bed. "I'm dying, Ethan," he said, his voice softening. "The doctors tell me 6 months at best. I can't undo the past. I can't bring back the years I missed with Grace, or with you, or your father, but I can make sure you never have to struggle again. I can make sure those boys grow up knowing they come from strength, from people who built, not just survived, from a family that might fall apart, but always finds its way back." His words carried the kind of conviction that didn't come from money. It came from regret. "This morning," he said, "you were a security guard that Lauren said would die alone and broke. Tonight, you're the heir to one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in America. Tomorrow, we start the process of getting your boys back full-time, and next week, Richard Prescott learns what happens when he crosses an Ashford." I sat there, staring at him, This man I hadn't known existed a week ago, seeing my mother's same quiet determination burning behind those pale blue eyes. "What did Mom call you when she was little?" I asked suddenly. For the first time, Henry's composure cracked. His mouth trembled, his eyes glistened. "Papa Theo," he said softly. "She called me Papa Theo." "Papa Theo," I repeated, the word strange but warm on my tongue. "I want you to meet Liam and Noah. They have Mom's eyes, too." He smiled, squeezing my hand with a strength that belied his frailty. "I would like nothing more," he said. "We have 6 months, Ethan. Let's make them count." 3 weeks later, I found myself standing in a Beverly Hills law office that smelled like leather, oak, and the quiet arrogance of wealth. The conference table gleamed like glass, and every surface seemed to whisper money. Across from me sat Lauren, her blonde hair perfect, her posture precise, her manicured nails tapping impatiently on the tabletop. Beside her sat Richard Prescott, his face already flushed with anger, his jaw twitching beneath the weight of his forced smile. Charles stood to my left, calm and unreadable, a stack of files resting neatly in front of him. The air was thick enough to cut. "So," Richard said finally, his voice dripping with condescension, "I hear congratulations are in order. The prodigal son of Grace Mills returns from the grave with a billionaire's last name. Impressive, if it weren't so absurd." I didn't rise to the bait. I just looked at him. This man who had ruined my life with a few well-placed bribes, and then glanced at Charles, who opened the folder and began laying out document after document like cards on a table. Bank statements, transaction logs, email transcripts, recordings burned onto disks. "Mr. Prescott," Charles said smoothly, "we're here today to discuss a settlement. You'll find the details outlined in these exhibits. They cover your misconduct during Mr. Hutchinson's divorce proceedings and your attempts to influence judicial outcomes." Richard's smirk faltered. Lauren shifted in her seat, her confidence thinning as she glanced down at the papers. "What is this?" she demanded. "It's over," I said quietly. "You took my house, my career, and tried to take my sons. But you're not taking anything else. Not anymore." The silence that followed felt electric. For the first time in years, I wasn't the man standing on the losing side of the table, and from the look on Richard Prescott's face, he knew it too. Their lawyer, the same smug man who'd shredded me in court 6 months ago, now looked like he wanted to vanish through the floor. His confident posture had evaporated, his tie suddenly too tight, his face pale. Across the table, Charles Duvall read from the documents in front of him with the calm precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel, or a man who knew he was holding a royal flush. "Full joint custody of Liam and Noah Hutchinson," he began evenly. "Immediate restoration of all parental rights, elimination of alimony payments based on drastically changed financial circumstances, and immediate access to all family residential properties for visitation purposes." Lauren's jaw dropped. "This is insane," she snapped, her voice pitching high enough to make the glass walls seem to hum. "He's a security guard. He lives in a studio apartment in Koreatown." I let her words hang in the air for a moment before replying, keeping my tone even, steady. "Actually," I said, "as of yesterday, I'm the CEO of Ashford Industries. The board voted unanimously after Henry's recommendation. I've already moved into the Bel Air estate, 12 bedrooms, a tennis court, pool, gardens. The boys will have plenty of space." For a split second, the entire room froze. Richard Prescott's face went from red to purple so fast I thought he might actually choke. His voice came out low and incredulous. "Ashford Industries? You're telling me Henry Ashford is your grandfather?" I nodded slowly. "The same Henry Ashford you've been pestering with buyout offers for the last 10 years? Yes, that's the one." Charles slid another paper across the table as I continued. "He sends his regards, by the way. And he wanted me to mention that the FBI will be contacting you soon about those bribes to Judge Whitaker. Apparently, federal prosecutors take judicial corruption very seriously." The color drained from Richard's face. His lawyer reached for a glass of water, his hand visibly shaking. Lauren's composure cracked like glass under pressure. Her lips trembled, her voice small now. "Ethan, wait," she stammered. "We can work this out. The boys need stability. They need their mother." "They need both their parents," I corrected gently. "Which is why I'm not asking for full custody. Just equal. 50-50. They deserve to have their father in their lives despite everything that's happened, and despite what you tried to take from me." Charles closed his folder, signaling that the meeting was over. "You'll receive the finalized court documents by tomorrow morning," he said calmly. "I'd recommend compliance. The alternative will be unpleasant." As we stood, Richard muttered something under his breath, but Charles's cool gaze silenced him. I walked out of that building taller than I'd felt in years, the weight that had been pressing on my chest since the divorce finally lifting. That evening, I drove to Lauren's house to pick up Liam and Noah, this time not in the old Honda with the cracked dashboard, but in a brand new Tesla Model S. Henry had insisted on buying it, saying the Civic had served its purpose and that it was time to arrive like the man you are. When I pulled up, the boys were already waiting on the porch. They froze for a moment when they saw the car, their eyes wide with disbelief, before sprinting down the steps. "Dad, is this yours?" Noah asked, his hand gliding over the smooth black hood like it was magic. "It is, buddy," I said, smiling. "Want to see something even cooler?" They climbed into the back, the leather seats swallowing their small frames, their laughter echoing through the car as I drove toward Bel Air. The closer we got, the wider their eyes grew. "Where are we going?" Liam asked, pressing his face to the window as we passed through the tall iron gates. "Are we visiting someone important?" "We're visiting family," I said, my chest tightening as I said it. The estate stretched before us like something out of a movie, white stone, sprawling lawns, towering oaks that caught the last of the sunset. When I parked in the circular drive, both boys just sat there, stunned. Inside, Henry waited in the living room, sitting in his wheelchair but dressed in his finest navy suit. He'd had his hair freshly cut, and he looked healthier than I'd ever seen him. The moment he saw us, his face broke into a smile so bright it filled the room. "Liam, Noah," I said softly, kneeling beside them. "This is my grandfather, which makes him your great-grandfather. You can call him Papa Theo." Noah's mouth fell open. "We have a great-grandfather?" "You do," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I have been waiting my whole life to meet you both." He handed each boy a carefully wrapped box tied with gold ribbon. Inside were photo albums, handmade, filled with pictures that told the story of a woman they never got to meet. Their grandmother, Grace. Each page was labeled with neat handwriting and little notes. There were photos of her as a child learning to ride a bike, as a teenager winning her first science fair, as a teacher standing proudly with her first class. "This is your grandmother, Grace," Henry explained, pointing to a picture of her holding a baby. "Me? She was smart, kind, and brave. The best parts of your father come from her." Liam traced his finger over one of the photos carefully. "She looks like Mom a little," he said. "Maybe," I replied softly. "But she had a heart a lot like yours." Henry's eyes shimmered as he watched them flip through the pages, their innocent curiosity filling the house with the sound of life again. For the first time in decades, the Ashford estate wasn't just a monument to one man's success, it was a home again. "That's your dad when he was born?" Henry said softly, pointing at the photo of my mother holding a bundled newborn. "She loved him more than all the stars in the sky, and she would have loved you both just the same." Liam and Noah listened, wide-eyed, flipping through the pages with careful fingers as though they might break the paper if they turned too quickly. Over the next several months, Henry became the grandfather my boys had never had. He went to every one of Liam's baseball games, sitting proudly in a custom wheelchair painted in the team's colors. The other parents whispered, realizing the old man in the designer suit cheering louder than anyone was that Henry Ashford, the billionaire. But to my boys, he was just Papa Theo, the guy who bought post-game ice cream and yelled, "That's my great-grandson," every time Liam hit the ball. He attended every one of Noah's school plays, always sitting in the front row, always holding a bouquet of flowers almost bigger than the kid himself. At dinner, he'd teach them lessons about business without ever calling it that. He'd hand them coins and say, "This isn't money, it's trust. What you do with it shows who you are." Then, after dinner, he'd take them to the art gallery wing of the house and talk about color, light, and how beauty was another form of truth. And every night, before they went to bed, he'd tell them stories about their grandmother, about the little girl who wanted to save the world before the world told her to slow down. Meanwhile, outside our walls, the Prescotts' empire began to crumble. Federal agents raided offices. Richard Prescott was indicted on 17 counts of bribery, tax fraud, and judicial corruption. His name, once untouchable, became a headline for disgrace. Lauren D., stripped of her father's protection and reputation, changed too. When she dropped the boys off one evening, her voice was small, her hands trembling. "I was wrong," she said, not meeting my eyes, "about everything." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, because forgiveness, I'd learned, doesn't need an audience. Henry lived for 7 more months, 1 month longer than the doctors had given him. "Pure stubbornness," he said with a wink when I told him how proud I was. "An Ashford family trait. We never leave when there's still work to be done." Near the end, he called me to his bedside one night. The room smelled faintly of medicine and the lavender oil the nurse used to calm him. His hand was cold but still strong when it wrapped around mine. Ethan, he said softly, I need you to know something. That night in the lobby, when I collapsed, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of dying without you knowing who you were. His voice broke, and for the first time, I saw tears in his eyes. You were never just a security guard. You were never alone. You were always an Ashford, always loved, even when you didn't know it. I couldn't speak. I just squeezed his hand and nodded. 2 days later, he was gone. At his funeral, hundreds of people came. Politicians, CEOs, actors, old business partners. Cameras lined the gates. But none of that mattered. Because in the front row, next to me, sat 2 8-year-old boys wearing black suits and red ties, their small hands folded, their eyes filled with tears. They didn't see a billionaire being mourned. They saw Papa Theo, the man who'd shown up for every game, every play, every bedtime story, the man who'd made them feel special, the man who'd made us whole. Lauren was there too, quiet, respectful. When the service ended, she came up, placed a single white rose on his casket, and whispered, "Thank you." I never asked what she meant, but I didn't need to. She knew, just like I did, that Henry's real legacy wasn't written in numbers or shares. It was written in second chances. Lauren had once told me I'd die alone and broke. She was wrong on both counts. But even that didn't matter anymore, because what Henry left me wasn't just money or power. It was perspective. The estates, the cars, the company, they were symbols, not salvation. The real gift he gave me was the understanding that family isn't about perfection or pride. It's about showing up even when it's decades too late. It's about choosing forgiveness over fury. It's about grabbing someone's arm in a dark lobby and refusing to let go until the truth finally surfaces. I still work security, in a way. I guard Henry's legacy, his mission to make medicine affordable, to keep Ashford Industries ethical and human. And I guard something even more important, the childhood of 2 boys who now know exactly who they are. They come from people who made mistakes but never stopped trying, who lost everything but rebuilt anyway, who learned that love outweighs any fortune. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't a bank account, it's the proof that you are always worthy of being found. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that it's never too late for family to find its way home, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below with your own stories of reconnection, forgiveness, or the moment that changed everything. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that remind us life's biggest miracles often come disguised as second chances. Thank you for watching, and remember, you're never as alone as you think you are.